Damian Crowe destroyed his marriage in 10 minutes to save his wife's life. He signed divorce papers, looked Lila Hart in the eye, and lied with brutal precision. What she didn't know was that enemies had marked her as his weakness, and walking away was the only protection he could give. But 6 months later, across a crowded downtown street, Damian's carefully controlled world shattered when he saw Lila again, her hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. The child he never knew existed, the woman he never stopped loving, and the truth that could no longer stay buried. If you're hooked, stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The city of Blackport looked beautiful from 40 stories up, especially when you were about to destroy everything that mattered. Damian Crowe stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room, watching the afternoon sun paint the harbor in shades of copper and gold. Behind him, the room was silent except for the whisper of expensive paper sliding across polished mahogany. He had orchestrated billion-dollar deals in this space, dismantled rival operations with nothing but words and willpower, built an empire that made grown men nervous. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he was about to do. "Damian?" Lila's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade wrapped in silk. He turned slowly, deliberately, letting his face settle into the mask he'd perfected over 38 years of surviving in a world that ate the weak for breakfast. The woman sitting at the conference table was small-framed and delicate-looking, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes the color of good whiskey. She wore jeans and a cream sweater, completely out of place in this temple of power and money, and that was exactly what he had always loved about her. Lila Hart had never tried to fit into his world. She had simply existed in it, like light finding its way through cracks. "I'm sorry," Damian said, and even to his own ears his voice sounded like gravel scraping across ice. "I know this seems sudden." Lila's eyes searched his face with an intensity that made his chest tighten. 3 years of marriage, and she could still read him better than anyone had a right to. Almost better. Because if she could truly see inside his head right now, she would know that every word coming out of his mouth was a carefully constructed lie designed to push her away. "Sudden," Lila repeated softly. She looked down at the papers in front of her, divorce documents prepared by the best legal team money could buy, already signed by him, waiting only for her name to make it official. "We had breakfast together this morning. You kissed me goodbye. You told me you loved me." "I know." "And now, 8 hours later, you want a divorce." Damian forced himself to hold her gaze. This was the critical moment. If he flinched, if he showed even a flicker of the agony tearing through him, she would fight. She would ask questions. She would refuse to sign. And then the men who had put a price on her head would know that severing their connection hadn't worked, that she was still the pressure point they could use to bring him to his knees. "Yes," he said. "I want a divorce." Lila's hands were steady as she picked up the pen his lawyer had left beside the papers. For a moment, Damian thought she might actually sign without another word, and he didn't know whether to feel relieved or devastated. But then she set the pen down. "Why?" she asked simply. Damian had prepared for this question. He had spent the last 72 hours, ever since Marcus Vance's whispered warning in a parking garage downtown, constructing the perfect explanation. Cold, clinical, designed to hurt just enough that she wouldn't look deeper. "Because this isn't working," he said. "Because we want different things. Because I married you thinking I could be the kind of man who comes home to a quiet life, and I can't." "You're lying." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Damian's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" Lila stood up, and even though she barely reached his shoulder, there was something formidable in the way she held herself. "I said you're lying. I don't know why, and I don't know what's really happening, but this—" She gestured at the papers, at him, at the cold corporate space around them. "This isn't you. You don't make decisions like this. You don't throw away 3 years of marriage because you had some kind of revelation between breakfast and dinner. People change, Lila. Not like this. Not you." For a fraction of a second, Damian wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to explain that 2 nights ago, he'd discovered that Victor Castellano, a man whose criminal network made Damian's business dealings look like a charity operation, had obtained photographs of Lila. The Castellano had people tracking her movements, documenting her routines, building a profile of the woman Damien Crowe loved. That Marcus Vance, the closest thing Damien had to a friend in this brutal world, had risked his own neck to deliver a warning. They know she's your weakness. They're going to use her to control you, unless she isn't your wife anymore. But telling her would defeat the entire purpose. If Lila knew the truth, she would refuse to leave. She would insist they face the danger together, and that was exactly the kind of thinking that would get her killed. "Believe what you want," Damien said, turning back to the window. "The papers are on the table. Sign them or don't. Either way, we're done." He heard her sharp intake of breath, felt the temperature in the room drop about 20 degrees. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Is there someone else?" "No." "Then look at me and tell me you don't love me anymore." Damien's reflection in the glass showed a man with steel gray eyes and a face that had forgotten how to show weakness. He had built his entire life on the principle that emotion was liability, that love was a weapon people used against you. He had broken that rule exactly once, when he married Lila Hart, a bookstore manager with no connection to his world, no understanding of the darkness he moved through, and now that single moment of vulnerability was about to cost him everything. He turned to face her. "I don't love you anymore," he said. The lie burned like acid on his tongue. Lila's face went pale, but she didn't cry. She didn't scream or throw the papers at him or collapse into the kind of emotional display he could have dismissed as weakness. Instead, she just looked at him with those whiskey-colored eyes that had seen through him from the very first day they met, and nodded slowly. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." She picked up the pen again. This time she didn't hesitate. Her signature flowed across the bottom of the page in smooth, elegant script, and Damien watched 3 years of marriage end in the time it took to write her name. When she finished, Lila set the pen down carefully and looked at him one last time. "I hope whatever you're protecting me from is worth this," she said. Then she walked out of the conference room, her footsteps quiet on the expensive carpet, and Damien Crowe stood alone in the golden afternoon light, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life or the only choice that could keep her alive. The penthouse felt like a tomb. Damien poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and stood at the window, looking out at Blackport's glittering skyline. The city he had conquered through a combination of ruthless intelligence and carefully calibrated violence spread out below him like a kingdom, and all he could think about was the way Lila's hand had trembled just slightly when she signed her name. His phone buzzed. Marcus Vance's name appeared on the screen. "It's done," Damien said by way of greeting. "I heard." Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. "How'd she take it?" "How do you think?" There was a pause. Then, "You did the right thing, Damien. Castellano's people were watching her apartment. They had surveillance on the bookstore. If you'd waited another week, I know." "Do you? Because you sound like a man who's about to do something stupid." Damien took a long drink of whiskey, letting the burn ground him. Marcus was right, of course. Marcus was always right when it came to the brutal mathematics of survival. They had served together in another life, before Damien built his empire, and Marcus became the kind of security consultant who made problems disappear. Marcus understood that, in their world, love was just another word for vulnerability. "I'm not going to do anything," Damien said. "She's safer this way. That's all that matters." "Good, because Castellano's watching you closely. One wrong move, one sign that the divorce was just for show, and he'll know. And then everything you just sacrificed will be for nothing." Damien closed his eyes. "I understand. I'll keep monitoring the situation. If anything changes..." "I said, I understand." Marcus was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know what she meant to you." Means, Damien thought. What she means to me. But he didn't correct his friend because past tense was safer. Past tense was the whole point. "Thanks, Marcus," he said, and ended the call. He stood at the window for another hour, drinking whiskey and watching the city lights flicker on like stars. Somewhere out there, Lila was probably sitting in the small apartment she had kept even after they married. The one-bedroom place above the vintage record store where she had insisted on maintaining her independence. He could picture her curled up on her worn couch, maybe crying now that she was alone, maybe staring at the walls trying to make sense of what had just happened. The thought of her pain was almost unbearable, but the thought of her death was worse. Damien finished his drink and forced himself to walk away from the window. The penthouse stretched out around him, 5,000 square feet of marble and steel and expensive art that suddenly felt meaningless. Every room held memories of Lila. Her laughter in the kitchen when she burned dinner for the third time in a week. Her voice reading poetry in the study while he worked. Her sleepy smile in the morning when sunlight caught her hair just right. He had thought he could compartmentalize this. Treat it like a business decision. Execute the plan, accept the consequences, move forward. But standing in their bedroom, his bedroom now, looking at the empty space where her things used to be, Damien realized that some losses couldn't be managed or controlled. Some prices couldn't be calculated in advance. He had just destroyed the only good thing in his life to save it, and he had no idea if he would ever recover. 3 weeks later, Lila Hart discovered she was pregnant. She stood in the bathroom of her apartment, staring at the positive test in her hand, and felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. The timing was cruel in its precision. She had probably conceived just days before Damien signed the divorce papers. While he was planning how to end their marriage, her body was already creating the life they had made together. Lila sat down on the edge of the bathtub and tried to breathe. She had spent the last 3 weeks moving through life like a ghost, going to work at the bookstore, smiling at customers, organizing inventory, pretending that her entire world hadn't collapsed in a glass-walled conference room 40 stories above the city. Her friends had tried to reach out, offering comfort and wine and theories about what had happened, but Lila couldn't explain what she didn't understand herself. Because we want different things. Because I married you thinking I could be the kind of man who comes home to a quiet life. And I can't. I don't love you anymore. The words haunted her. Not because she believed them. She had meant what she said in that conference room about knowing he was lying, but because she couldn't figure out why. Damien was many things. Complicated, guarded, sometimes too controlled for his own good. But he wasn't cruel. He didn't play games with people's hearts, unless something had changed, unless she had been wrong about him all along. Lila looked down at the pregnancy test again. 2 pink lines that represented a future she had never planned for, a complication that defied every careful boundary she and Damien had maintained during their marriage. They had talked about children exactly once, early on, and agreed to wait. His work was demanding and occasionally dangerous. She didn't know details, but she wasn't blind, and she had her own dreams of maybe opening a bookstore someday, expanding beyond managing someone else's inventory. Someday, they had said, when things are more settled. Now someday had arrived without permission, and she was facing it alone. The smart thing would be to call Damien, tell him, let him decide how to handle this. But the memory of his cold eyes and colder words stopped her. He had made his choice. He had walked away. And Lila had enough pride left to know that she wouldn't trap a man with a baby he didn't want, in a marriage he had already ended. She would figure this out herself. The decision made, Lila stood up and threw the pregnancy test in the trash. Then she washed her face, pulled her hair back, and walked into her kitchen to make tea. Like this was just another normal evening in a life that had stopped being normal the moment Damien Crowe told her he didn't love her anymore. But normal lasted exactly 3 more hours. The call came at 11 p.m. Lila was sitting on her couch, halfway through a novel she had been trying to read for days without retaining a single word, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She normally didn't answer calls from strangers, but something made her pick up. Hello? Mrs. Crowe? The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. I apologize for calling so late. My name is Robert Chen. I'm an associate of your husband's, your ex-husband's, and I need to speak with you about a sensitive matter. Lila sat up straighter. What kind of matter? Not over the phone. Could you meet me tomorrow? There's a cafe near your bookstore, Riverside Coffee. I'll be there at noon. I don't understand. What is this about? There was a pause, then, it's about why Damien divorced you, and about the people who are still watching you, even though you're no longer his wife. The line went dead. Lila stared at her phone, heart hammering, people watching her. The words triggered something, a memory she had dismissed as paranoia, a feeling she had ignored because it seemed crazy. But now that someone had said it out loud, now that the unease had a name, she realized it had been there for weeks. The man in the dark sedan who seemed to be parked outside her building too often. The woman in the coffee shop who always looked away just a little too quickly when Lila glanced up. The sense of being observed that she had blamed on post-divorce anxiety. What if it hadn't been anxiety at all? Lila spent the rest of the night pacing her small apartment, debating whether to meet this Robert Chen person or ignore the call entirely. By morning, curiosity had won over caution. If someone was watching her, she needed to know why. And if this had something to do with Damien's sudden decision to end their marriage, she needed to understand what she had really been married to. At 11:30 the next day, she walked to Riverside Coffee and found a table near the window where she could watch the door. The cafe was busy with the lunch crowd, students from the nearby college, office workers grabbing sandwiches, mothers with strollers, and Lila felt absurdly exposed sitting there, waiting for a stranger who claimed to have answers about her failed marriage. Robert Chen appeared at exactly noon. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of careful posture that suggested military training. He spotted her immediately, ordered a black coffee, and slid into the chair across from her without asking permission. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "Who are you?" Lila asked, skipping the pleasantries. "I work for Marcus Vance. He's Damien's head of security." "I know who Marcus is. I've met him twice." "Then you know he takes Damien's safety very seriously." Robert took a sip of his coffee, eyes scanning the cafe in a way that made Lila's pulse quicken. "What you don't know is that 3 weeks ago, a man named Victor Castellano obtained detailed information about you. Your routines, your work schedule, the route you take home, where you buy groceries, everything." Lila's throat went dry. "Why?" "Because Damien Crowe is one of the few people in this city with enough influence to be a problem for Castellano's operations. And because Castellano's standard method of dealing with problems is to find their weakest point and apply pressure until they break. And I'm the weak point." "You were," Robert corrected gently. "As long as you were Damien's wife, you were leverage. A way to control him, but a divorced ex-wife. Someone he publicly cut ties with in the most brutal way possible, much less valuable." Understanding crashed over Lila like a wave. He didn't want a divorce. No. "He ended our marriage to protect me." Robert nodded. "Marcus tried to find another way. We increased security around you without your knowledge. We had people monitoring Castellano's organization. But the threat level kept escalating. Castellano made it clear through channels that he was prepared to move against you unless Damien backed off certain business ventures. Damien had 72 hours to decide, you or everything he'd built. So he chose everything he'd built," Lila said bitterly. "No," Robert said sharply. "He chose you. He walked away from deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He pulled out of territories he'd spent years securing. He gave Castellano every single thing he wanted, and then he divorced you publicly to make sure Castellano understood you weren't leverage anymore. He sacrificed everything else to keep you safe." Lila's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. "Then why didn't he tell me?" "Because if you knew, you would have fought to stay. You would have refused to leave him, and Castellano would have seen through the whole thing." Robert leaned forward. "The divorce only works as protection if it's real, Mrs. Crowe. If there's any indication that you and Damien are still connected, still in communication, still in love, then Castellano will know it was just theater and the threat to you comes back. So this meeting is a violation of the protocol we established? Yes. Marcus is going to be furious with me. But something changed last night, and you need to know about it." Lila's chest tightened. "What changed?" Robert pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and slid it across the table. Lila opened it with trembling fingers and found herself looking at a photograph. Grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough to recognize her own face. She was standing outside her apartment building, one hand on the door, looking back over her shoulder. But what made her blood run cold was the red circle drawn around her midsection and the handwritten note in the margin, "Confirm." "Confirm what?" Lila whispered. Robert's expression was grim. "Castellano's people have been monitoring you since the divorce. They're looking for any sign that you're still important to Damien. And yesterday, one of our analysts intercepted communication suggesting they've noticed changes in your behavior. Different patterns. Medical appointments." Lila's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, and she saw Robert's eyes track the movement. "Mrs. Crowe," he said quietly, "are you pregnant?" The cafe noise faded to white static. Lila felt like she was falling through space. watching her life fragment into pieces she couldn't catch. Pregnant. Watched. Marked. And Damien, somewhere in this city, believing he had saved her by walking away, not knowing that the baby she carried was about to turn her into leverage all over again. I found out yesterday, she heard herself say. I haven't told anyone. Robert closed his eyes briefly, and Lila saw genuine fear cross his face. How far along? Maybe 3 weeks. I'm not sure. You need to disappear. Today. Right now. We can set you up somewhere Castellano can't find you, somewhere safe, until we figure out how to handle this. I'm not running. Mrs. Crow, my name is Lila Hart, she said sharply. I'm not Mrs. Crow anymore, remember? That's the whole point. She stood up, legs unsteady but voice firm. Thank you for the warning, but I'm not disappearing, and I'm not putting my life in the hands of Damien's security team. If I'm in danger, then Damien needs to know. If you contact him, Castellano will know. The divorce becomes meaningless. You'll both be targets. Then we'll both be targets, Lila said. But I'm not doing this alone. She walked out of the cafe before Robert could argue, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might be sick. She made it half a block before she had to lean against a building and force herself to breathe. Pregnant, watched, hunted. And the man she loved, the man who had broken her heart to save her life, had no idea that the danger he'd tried to erase was about to come back with a vengeance. Lila pulled out her phone and stared at Damien's contact information. 3 weeks ago, she would have called him without thinking. But now, everything was different. Now she understood that the cold stranger in the conference room had been a performance, that the man who told her he didn't love her had been lying to protect her. Now she knew the truth. And the truth was that loving Damien Crow had always been dangerous. The only question was whether she was brave enough to face that danger instead of running from it. Lila's thumb hovered over Damien's name for a long moment. Then she lowered the phone and made a different decision, one that would either save them both or destroy everything that remained. She was going to find out exactly what kind of man Victor Castellano was. And then she was going to make damn sure he understood that she wasn't anybody's leverage. Not anymore. Finding Victor Castellano turned out to be easier than Lila expected, which should have been her first warning. She spent 2 days asking careful questions, conversations with longtime customers at the bookstore who seemed to know everyone in Blackport's underground economy, a few discreet inquiries to a bartender who had once mentioned working at a club Damien's associates frequented. By the 3rd day, she had a name, a location, and a terrible plan that she knew was probably going to get her killed. The Opal Room occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in Blackport's industrial district, the kind of place that looked abandoned from the outside but hummed with expensive secrets after dark. Lila arrived at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night, wearing the one cocktail dress she owned and enough borrowed confidence to get past the stone-faced security at the door. The interior was all dark wood and darker corners, with blue lighting that made everyone look like they were underwater. Well-dressed men and women clustered around small tables, their conversations pitched low beneath jazz music that sounded live but came from hidden speakers. Lila felt eyes tracking her as she crossed to the bar and fought the urge to turn around and run. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked. He was young and pretty, with the kind of studied disinterest that came from seeing too much. "Information," Lila said quietly. "I'm looking for Victor Castellano." The bartender's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Never heard of him." "I think you have." Lila pulled out $500 in cash, money she had withdrawn that morning from the emergency fund she'd been building since college, and laid it on the bar. "I need 5 minutes of his time, that's all." "Lady, I don't know what you think happens here, but tell him Lila Hart wants to discuss Damien Crow," she interrupted. "Tell him I'm Damien's ex-wife, and I have information he'll want to hear. 5 minutes, please." The bartender looked at her for a long moment, then at the money, then back at her face. Whatever he saw there made him pick up the cash and disappear through a door behind the bar. Lila waited, heart hammering, wondering if she had just made a catastrophic mistake or the only choice that made sense. 3 minutes later, a woman appeared at Lila's elbow. She was tall and striking, with silver hair cut sharp as a blade and eyes that could have stripped paint off walls. She wore a black suit that probably cost more than Lila made in a month, and moved with the kind of predatory grace that made people step aside without realizing why. "Mrs. Crow," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "Ms. Hart," Lila corrected. "I'm divorced. So I heard. I'm Elena Castellano, Victor's sister and business partner. She gestured toward a private booth in the back corner. Walk with me. Lila followed, acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. Elena moved through the crowd like royalty, and conversations paused in her wake. When they reached the booth, a man was already waiting. Victor Castellano looked nothing like Lila had imagined. She'd been expecting someone obvious, scar-faced, brutish, wearing expensive suits like armor. Instead, the man rising from the leather seat was lean and almost scholarly, with gray threading through dark hair and eyes that held the flat calculation of someone who viewed people as chess pieces. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans and smiled at Lila like they were old friends. "Ms. Hart," he said warmly, "what an unexpected pleasure. Please sit." Lila slid into the booth across from him, Elena settling beside her brother with the casual intimacy of siblings who had survived things together. Up close, Victor's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and Lila felt her throat tighten. "I appreciate you seeing me," she managed. "Of course. It's not every day that Damien Crow's ex-wife walks into my establishment and asks for a meeting." Victor tilted his head. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about what you think we have to discuss. I want you to stop watching me." The words came out steadier than Lila felt. Victor's expression didn't change, but Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean," Victor said mildly. "Yes, you do." Lila forced herself to hold his gaze. "I know you had people following me, taking photographs, documenting my life. I know you used me as leverage against Damien, and I know that's why he divorced me. To take away your power over him." Fascinating theory," Victor murmured. "And you came here to tell me this because it worked. The divorce was real. Damien doesn't love me anymore, and I don't want anything to do with him or his world. So there's no point in your people continuing to monitor me. I'm not leverage. I'm just someone trying to move on with my life." Victor studied her for a long moment, and Lila had the unsettling sense of being dissected by that calm gaze. Then he leaned back and laughed, a genuine sound that somehow made the air feel colder. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," he said. "I haven't decided which. Does it matter?" "It does, actually, because brave people are dangerous and stupid people are liabilities." He laced his fingers together on the table. "Let me tell you what I think, Ms. Hart. I think Damien Crow is one of the most ruthless, calculating men I've ever encountered. I think he built an empire by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else and never showing weakness. And I think that when I started applying pressure to his operations, he realized the quickest way to make me stop was to remove the one piece I could use against him." "Me," Lila said quietly. "You," Victor agreed. "The sweet, innocent bookstore manager who had no idea what kind of man she married. The perfect pressure point." He paused. "Except here's what's interesting. After the divorce, I had my people continue monitoring you just to make sure the separation was genuine. And do you know what they found?" Lila's hands were ice cold in her lap. "What?" "That you're not quite as innocent as everyone thinks, that you've been asking questions about me, making inquiries, and that you're pregnant with Damien Crow's child." The booth seemed to tilt. Lila opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Elena leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You thought we wouldn't notice? The medical appointments? The changes in your behavior? We've been watching you for months, Ms. Hart. We know everything." "Then you know the baby doesn't change anything," Lila said, finding her voice. "Damien doesn't want me. He made that very clear. This child is my responsibility, not his." Victor's smile widened. "You're lying. Not about the pregnancy, that's real enough, but about Damien not wanting you. I've seen the surveillance footage from the divorce. I watched a man destroy himself to push you away. That's not indifference, Ms. Hart. That's love." "You're wrong." "Am I?" Victor stood up, and despite his average height, there was something towering in his presence. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go home and continue your life exactly as you have been. And when that baby is born, you're going to let me know. Because a child, Damien Crow's child, is worth infinitely more than an ex-wife ever was." Horror crashed over Lila in waves. "I won't let you use my baby." "You won't have a choice." Victor's voice stayed pleasant, conversational, which somehow made the threat more terrifying. "I don't need your cooperation, Ms. Hart. I just need you to stay alive and pregnant for the next several months. After that, well, we'll see what kind of arrangement we can come to. Lila stood up so fast she knocked her purse off the seat. I'll tell Damien. I'll tell him everything. Please do, Victor said. Call him right now if you want. Tell him you're carrying his child and that I plan to use that child as leverage. See what happens. Because the moment you make that call, the moment Damien knows you're still in his life in any meaningful way, I'll move against you both. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And when I do, neither of you will see it coming. Elena picked up Lila's purse and handed it to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You should go home now. Get some rest. Pregnancy is exhausting, I hear. Lila took the purse with numb fingers. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do something other than stand there feeling helpless. But she could see the truth in Victor's eyes. He had already won this round, and they both knew it. If you hurt my baby, she started. I have no intention of hurting your baby, Victor interrupted gently. Children are precious, Ms. Hart, especially children who can be raised to understand the value of loyalty and family. Who knows? Maybe one day your son or daughter will work for me instead of against me. The casual horror of that statement sent Lila stumbling backward. She turned and walked out of the booth, through the club, past the bar, where the pretty bartender wouldn't meet her eyes. She made it outside before her legs gave out, and she ended up sitting on the curb in her cocktail dress, gasping for air. A black sedan pulled up. For a terrified moment, Lila thought it was Castellano's people coming to take her somewhere. Then the passenger window rolled down and she saw Robert Chen's concerned face. Get in, he said. Marcus has been tracking your phone. We've been outside this whole time. Lila climbed into the car on shaking legs. Robert handed her a bottle of water and waited while she drank half of it in desperate gulps. That was incredibly stupid, he said finally. I know. You could have gotten yourself killed. I know. Marcus is going to lose his mind when I tell him what you did. I don't care. Lila set the water bottle down and looked at Robert. Castellano knows about the baby. He's planning to use it against Damien, which means the divorce accomplished exactly nothing, and I need to talk to my ex-husband before this gets any worse. Robert's jaw tightened. If you contact Damien, Castellano already knows the divorce was fake. He said it himself. He watched the surveillance footage. He knows Damien still loves me. Lila's voice cracked. So, what's the point of staying away? What's the point of any of this if the protection was always an illusion? Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. It's me, he said when someone answered. We have a situation. 30 minutes later, Lila found herself in the back room of a closed restaurant downtown, sitting across from Marcus Vance and trying not to fall apart completely. Marcus looked exactly like she remembered, mid-40s, built like someone who had spent his life preparing for violence, with eyes that missed nothing. He'd been polite but distant the 2 times they'd met during her marriage, maintaining the professional boundary between Damien's personal life and his security operations. Now he looked at her with something between frustration and sympathy. You shouldn't have gone to Castellano, he said without preamble. I didn't know what else to do. You could have trusted us to handle it. Handle it how? Lila demanded. By keeping me in the dark while you and Damien make decisions about my life? By treating me like something fragile that needs to be protected instead of a person with agency? Marcus sighed. I understand you're angry. I'm not angry. I'm terrified. Lila's hands were shaking again. I'm pregnant with a child that Victor Castellano wants to use as a weapon. I'm being watched by people who could hurt me anytime they want. And the man I love thinks he saved me by walking away, when all he did was make me face this danger alone. He didn't walk away because he wanted to, Marcus said quietly. He walked away because I told him it was the only option. Were you wrong? The question hung between them. Marcus looked down at his hands, scarred, capable hands that had protected Damien for years, and Lila saw something shift in his expression. Maybe, he admitted. Castellano is smarter than I anticipated, more patient. I thought the divorce would make you irrelevant to him. Instead, he's been playing a longer game. So what now? Marcus met her eyes. Now we tell Damien the truth. All of it. Relief and terror washed over Lila in equal measure. He's going to be furious. With me, yes. With himself, probably. But not with you. Marcus stood up. Wait here. I'll bring him. He's here? In Blackport? He's never left. Did you really think he could walk away completely? Marcus's expression softened. He's been monitoring you from a distance this whole time, making sure you're safe, driving himself crazy with worry. The divorce papers might say you're no longer married, but Damien Crowe has never stopped being your husband in every way that matters. Then he was gone, and Lila was alone with her racing thoughts. She tried to prepare herself for seeing Damien again, tried to plan what she would say, how she would explain. But when the door opened 20 minutes later and he walked in, every carefully constructed thought evaporated. He looked terrible. Damien Crowe, who had always been immaculately controlled, looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and there was a hollowness to his face that made Lila's chest ache. He stopped just inside the door, staring at her like she might disappear if he moved. "Lila," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. She stood up, and suddenly they were moving toward each other. Not running, not rushing, but drawn together by something that had never stopped pulling despite 3 weeks of separation. They stopped with 3 feet between them, close enough to touch, far enough to maintain the illusion of distance. "Marcus said you went to Castellano," Damien said. "Is that true?" "Yes." "Are you insane?" The words came out harsh, but Lila heard the fear underneath. "He could have killed you. He could have—" Damien stopped, pressing his palms against his eyes. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that I was tired of being treated like a pawn," Lila said. "Tired of men making decisions about my safety without asking what I wanted. Tired of being protected from a distance by someone who claimed not to love me anymore." Damien's hands dropped. "I never claimed that. You said it. In the conference room. You looked me in the eyes and told me you didn't love me. I lied." "I know." Lila took a breath. "I know everything now, Damien, about Castellano's threats, about why you divorced me, about how you sacrificed your business to keep me safe." Marcus explained it all. "Then you understand why we can't be together," Damien said roughly. "Why staying away from you is the only thing keeping you alive. Except it's not working. Castellano knows the divorce was fake. He knows you still love me. And he knows—" Lila's voice caught. "He knows I'm pregnant." Damien went absolutely still. The color drained from his face, and for a moment Lila thought he might collapse. "What?" he whispered. "I'm pregnant. About 3 weeks. I found out the day after Robert Chen warned me about Castellano's surveillance." Lila wrapped her arms around herself. "I wasn't going to tell you. I thought if you didn't know, if you could just move on, then maybe the divorce would work the way you planned. But Castellano's people figured it out. They've been watching me, documenting everything, and now he's planning to use our baby as leverage against you." Damien crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was desperate, fierce, and Lila felt 3 weeks of control shatter as he buried his face in her hair. His whole body was shaking, and she realized with shock that he was crying, silent, wrenching sobs that he muffled against her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I just stayed away, if I made the sacrifice clean, you'd be safe. But I failed. I failed you and our baby. And—" "Stop," Lila said, pulling back just enough to see his face. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, and the sight broke something open in her chest. "Stop apologizing. You did what you thought was right. We both did. But we can't keep making decisions in isolation. Not anymore. Not with a baby coming." Damien cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "Tell me what you need. Anything. Everything. I'll give you whatever you want." "I need you to stop trying to save me by yourself," Lila said. "I need you to let me be part of this fight instead of something you hide away. And I need—" Her voice broke. "I need you to tell me that you love me, not as a strategy or a performance, but as the truth." "I love you," Damien said immediately. "I have loved you every single day since the moment we met. Divorcing you nearly destroyed me. Watching you walk out of that conference room was the hardest thing I've ever done. And knowing you've been carrying our child while I stayed away, thinking I was protecting you—" He pressed his forehead against hers. "I love you, Lila Hart. I never stopped. I never will." Lila kissed him then, pouring 3 weeks of pain and longing into the connection. Damien kissed her back like he was drowning, and she was air, his hands gentle on her face despite the intensity of his grip. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the world felt simultaneously more dangerous and more right than it had in weeks. "So what now?" Lila whispered. "How do we fight someone like Castellano?" "Together," Damien said. "No more secrets, no more protecting you by pushing you away. We face this as partners." The door opened, and Marcus walked in with Robert Chen and another man Lila didn't recognize. Marcus took one look at Damien and Lila standing wrapped in each other's arms and nodded, as if confirming something he'd always known. "Good," he said simply. "Now we can actually make a plan that might work." They spent the next 2 hours mapping out Castellano's operation, identifying weaknesses, and building a strategy that made Lila's head spin. The stranger turned out to be James Torres, a federal prosecutor who had been building a case against Castellano for years without enough evidence to move forward. Damien's resources, combined with Torres's legal expertise and Marcus's tactical knowledge, created possibilities Lila hadn't imagined. But the foundation of every plan was the same. Lila had to disappear. "Not permanently," Marcus clarified when he saw her expression. "Just long enough for us to dismantle Castellano's leverage. We move you somewhere he can't find you, somewhere secure, while we work the legal and strategic angles. Cut off his access to you completely." "He'll know I'm gone," Lila protested. "His people are watching my apartment." "Let them watch," Damien said. "We'll stage it to look like you left me. Like you found out about the lies and decided you were done with all of it. Castellano will believe you're running from me, not from him. And when he finds me, he won't." Marcus's voice was absolute certainty. "I have safe houses Castellano doesn't know exist, places with security even his organization can't penetrate. You'll be protected 24 hours a day by people I trust with my life." Lila looked at Damien. "You won't be able to visit. If Castellano is watching you, any contact between us will blow the whole thing." "I know. It could be months. I'll be showing soon. You'll miss—" She pressed her hand to her stomach. "You'll miss everything." Damien's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'll miss it. And it will kill me. But you'll be alive. The baby will be safe. That's all that matters." "No," Lila said firmly. "That's not all that matters. We matter. Our family matters. And I'm not going into hiding unless we have a real plan to end this, not just survive it." Torres leaned forward. "We do. Castellano's organization is built on intimidation and leverage, but it's also built on illegal financial networks, money laundering, offshore accounts, shell corporations. If we can expose the financial infrastructure, the whole operation collapses. But we need time to gather evidence, time to build an airtight case, time that we won't have if he's actively threatening you." "How long?" Lila asked. 4 months? Maybe 5. Lila calculated quickly. 4 months would take her well into her second trimester. She'd be showing, possibly feeling the baby move, going through all the milestones she'd imagined sharing with Damien, except completely alone, but alive. And so would their child. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll do it." Damien pulled her close again, and Lila felt his heart hammering against her cheek. They stayed like that while Marcus and Torres worked out the logistics of her disappearance. The cover story, the timeline, the security protocols. Robert would handle the actual extraction, moving her in the middle of the night to eliminate surveillance risk. She'd have 48 hours to settle into the safe house before Marcus's team began the systematic dismantling of everything Castellano had built. "There's one more thing," Torres said as the meeting wound down. "Castellano needs to believe you're genuinely running, which means, Damien, you need to look devastated, publicly. Let people see that Lila leaving destroyed you." "That won't be hard," Damien said quietly. "It will destroy me." Lila spent her last night in Blackport lying in Damien's arms in the safe house Marcus had secured for their reunion, memorizing the sound of his heartbeat and the feel of his hands on her skin. They didn't sleep. They talked about the baby, names they liked, hopes they had, fears they couldn't quite voice. Damien placed his hand over her stomach, even though there was nothing to feel yet, and promised their child that he would build a world safe enough to grow up in. "I'll come back," Lila whispered as dawn started breaking through the windows. "No matter how long it takes, no matter what happens, I'll come back to you." "I know," Damien said, but his eyes were wet when he kissed her goodbye. Robert came at 6 a.m. Lila grabbed the single bag she'd been allowed to pack and walked out of the safe house without looking back, because she knew if she turned around, she wouldn't be able to leave. The safe house Marcus had arranged was 3 hours north, tucked into mountains that made Blackport feel like another world entirely. It was comfortable, more than comfortable actually, with modern amenities and stunning views and everything Lila could need for an extended stay. There was a medical team on call, security that made Fort Knox look casual, and even a small library that someone had stocked with books from her favorite genres. But it was still a prison, and Lila was still alone. She settled into a routine. Morning walks around the secured property, afternoons reading or talking to the doctor about prenatal care, evenings watching the sun set over mountains that were beautiful and empty and nothing like home. Marcus called once a week with carefully worded updates that told her nothing concrete and everything important. They were making progress. Castellano was getting nervous. Damien was holding together. Barely. At 12 weeks, Lila had her first ultrasound in the safe house's private medical suite. The doctor moved the wand over her belly, and suddenly there was a heartbeat, fast and strong and impossibly real. Lila stared at the screen, watching the tiny shape that was her baby, and felt tears streaming down her face. "Would you like me to record this?" the doctor asked gently. "We could send it to the baby's father." Lila almost said yes. Almost broke protocol right there because the thought of Damien seeing this, hearing this, was overwhelming. But then she remembered Castellano's flat eyes and calculated threats and shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered. "Soon, but not yet." At 16 weeks, she started showing. Not much, just a slight curve to her stomach that she could still hide under loose clothing. But it was visible enough that she spent long minutes every day standing in front of the mirror, running her hands over the evidence of the life growing inside her and wondering if Damien would recognize her when this was finally over. The updates from Marcus became more frequent. Torres had found cracks in Castellano's financial network. Federal agents were building cases against his associates. The organization was fracturing under pressure, and Victor Castellano was making mistakes. But he still didn't know where Lila was. At 20 weeks, the baby started moving. Lila was reading on the couch when she felt it. A flutter so faint she almost dismissed it as imagination. Then it came again, stronger this time, and she gasped out loud. The security guard stationed by her door looked up in alarm. "I'm fine," Lila managed. The baby just moved." The guard smiled, and Lila saw something soften in his professional demeanor. "That's wonderful, ma'am." It was wonderful, and it was devastating, because the one person who should have been there to feel this miracle was 3 hours away, pretending he didn't care that she was gone, fighting a war designed to bring her home. That night, Lila broke protocol. She used the encrypted phone Marcus had given her for emergencies only, and she sent a single message to the number she wasn't supposed to contact. "The baby moved today. I wish you could have felt it." The response came 30 seconds later, and Lila could practically hear Damien's voice breaking. "I wish that too. Every single day. I love you both so much." She stared at the words until they blurred, then deleted the entire conversation and turned off the phone. 3 more weeks, Marcus had said in his last update. 3 more weeks and they'd have everything they needed to move against Castellano. 3 more weeks and she could go home. Lila pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the baby moving beneath her palm, and counted down the days. 3 weeks turned into 3 days, and everything went wrong at once. Lila was in the safe house library, reading a book she couldn't concentrate on, when Marcus burst through the door with an expression that made her blood freeze. He had 2 security guards with him, both armed, both moving with the kind of urgency that meant someone's life was in immediate danger. "We need to move you," Marcus said without preamble. "Right now." Lila stood up, the book falling forgotten to the floor. "What happened?" "Castellano found you. I don't know how, but he knows where you are." Marcus was already pulling her toward the door. "We have maybe 30 minutes before his people arrive, and that's if we're lucky." "How is that possible?" Lila's voice came out higher than she intended. "You said this location was secure. You said—" "I know what I said." Marcus's jaw was tight with fury. Someone talked. Someone in my own organization sold us out, and I'm going to find out who. But right now, the only thing that matters is getting you somewhere Castellano can't reach. They moved through the safe house at a near run, grabbing the emergency bag that had been packed and ready since Lila's arrival. Outside, a black SUV waited with its engine already running. Marcus practically lifted Lila into the back seat, then climbed in beside her as the driver peeled out of the driveway with enough force to throw them both against the seats. "Where are we going?" Lila asked, one hand pressed protectively over her stomach. "Blackport." "That's insane. Castellano owns half of Blackport. You said bringing me back there would be suicide." "It would have been, but things have changed." Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. "We're mobile. ETA, 90 minutes. Is Damien ready?" He listened for a moment, then his expression hardened. "I don't care if he's ready or not. Tell him his wife is coming home and we're going to end this tonight." The drive back to Blackport was the longest 90 minutes of Lila's life. Marcus spent most of it on the phone, coordinating with what sounded like a small army. The fragments of conversation Lila caught painted a picture of controlled chaos: federal agents moving into position, Torres securing warrants, Damien pulling together every resource he had for what Marcus kept calling the end game. "What's the plan?" Lila finally asked when Marcus ended yet another call. He looked at her, and something in his expression reminded Lila that before Marcus Vance became Damien's head of security, he'd been a soldier who survived things most people didn't come back from. "The plan is we stop running," he said quietly. "Castellano has been hunting you for months because he thinks you're Damien's weakness. Tonight, we're going to show him that you're actually Damien's strength, and then we're going to take everything he's built and burn it to the ground." "That's not a plan. That's a suicide mission." "Maybe, but it's the only option we have left." Marcus's phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen. Torres came through. He's got federal warrants for Castellano, his sister Elena, and 15 of their top associates. The charges include money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 40 other felonies. The moment we can put Castellano in a room with federal agents, it's over. So why haven't they arrested him already? Because Castellano is smart. He's insulated himself with lawyers and shell corporations, and enough plausible deniability that getting a conviction requires catching him in the act of something undeniable. Marcus met her eyes. "Which is where you come in." Understanding crashed over Lila like ice water. "You're using me as bait. I'm using you as the catalyst. There's a difference." "Not to me there isn't." Lila's voice shook. "You want to put me in front of Castellano and wait for him to do something illegal enough to arrest him for. What if he just kills me instead?" "He won't." "How do you know?" "Because Damien will be there, and I will be there, and about 20 federal agents will be there, along with every piece of security and firepower I could assemble on 3 hours' notice." Marcus's voice was steel-wrapped in certainty. "Castellano is going to make a move tonight. We're just going to make sure it's the last move he ever makes as a free man." They reached Blackport as the sun was setting, painting the city in shades of amber and shadow. The driver took them to a downtown hotel, the Meridian, one of the expensive high-rises Lila had always admired from a distance. Marcus hustled her through a service entrance and up a freight elevator to the penthouse floor, where armed security guards flanked every exit. The suite they entered was massive, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture, and Damien was standing in the middle of it, looking like he'd been carved from stone. When he saw Lila, something cracked in that immovable exterior. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms with enough force to lift her off her feet. Lila wrapped herself around him, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne and feeling the tension vibrating through his entire body. "Are you okay?" he asked against her hair. "The baby—" "We're fine. I'm fine." Lila pulled back just enough to see his face. He looked worse than he had 5 months ago, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much fear. "Damien, what's happening? Marcus said we're ending this tonight, but he won't tell me how." "Because the how is dangerous, and I don't want you involved." Damien's hands framed her face, thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I want you on a plane out of the country. Somewhere Castellano will never find you." "We tried that. It didn't work." "Then we'll try harder. We'll go somewhere remote, somewhere—" "No." Lila pulled out of his grip. "I'm not running anymore. I'm not spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when he's going to find us. Our baby deserves better than that. We deserve better than that. Our baby deserves a living mother, Damien said roughly. Then help me make that happen, not by hiding me, but by actually ending this. Lila turned to Marcus. Tell me the real plan. All of it. Marcus looked at Damien, who closed his eyes and nodded once. Then Marcus pulled out his phone and brought up a series of photographs. This is the Opal Room, he said, showing Lila images of the club where she'd met Castellano months ago. Tonight, Victor is hosting a private event. Very exclusive, very illegal. Torres's team has been monitoring the guest list, and it reads like a criminal who's who. Drug suppliers, money launderers, corrupt officials. If we can get federal agents inside during the event, we can take down Castellano's entire network in one move. But you need a reason to raid the club, Lila said slowly. We need probable cause, Marcus corrected. Something that justifies immediate law enforcement action. And the easiest way to get that is if Castellano makes a direct threat against you in a way that federal agents can witness. So I walk into the club and what? Hope he threatens to kill me in front of witnesses? Not hope. Guarantee. Damien's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. Castellano is obsessed with control, with proving he's smarter than everyone else. If you show up tonight, visibly pregnant with my child, after months of successfully hiding from him, it will enrage him. He'll want to reassert his power, make it clear that you're still his leverage. And when he does, federal agents move in, Lila finished. They arrest him for conspiracy, threatening a witness, whatever charge sticks. And Torres uses that arrest to execute the warrants for the financial crimes. Exactly. Lila looked between Damien and Marcus, seeing the careful way they were both watching her. You're leaving something out. What's the catch? Damien's jaw tightened. The catch is that Castellano is unpredictable. We can't control exactly how he'll react to seeing you. He might make threats. He might try to have you grabbed by his security. He might... His voice broke. He might do something violent before we can stop him. Which is why you'll be wearing a wire, Marcus added quickly. Audio and video broadcasting to federal agents positioned throughout the building. The moment Castellano says or does anything actionable, they move in. You won't be alone for more than 60 seconds. 60 seconds is a long time when someone wants to hurt you, Lila said quietly. I know, which is why I'm begging you not to do this. Damien took her hands in his, and Lila felt them trembling. Let me find another way. Give me more time. I'll figure out how to take Castellano down without putting you in danger. We don't have more time. He found the safe house. He'll find the next one and the one after that. Lila squeezed his hands. I'm doing this, Damien, not because I want to, but because it's the only way to end this and give our baby a future without looking over our shoulder forever. I can't lose you, Damien whispered. I can't watch you walk into danger and not be able to protect you. You will protect me. You and Marcus and every federal agent Torres has waiting. Lila pulled him close, pressing her forehead against his. Have faith in the plan. Have faith in us. 2 hours later, Lila stood in front of a hotel mirror while a federal tech specialist attached surveillance equipment to her body. The wire was smaller than she'd expected, nearly invisible once hidden under her clothing, but knowing it was there made her acutely aware of how fragile the protection really was. The video camera was built into a pendant necklace, aimed to capture whatever she was looking at. Test, the tech said. Say something. This is a terrible plan, Lila said clearly. From across the room, Marcus's voice came through a speaker. Copy that. Audio is perfect. Lila, the video feed is coming through clean. We'll have eyes on you the entire time. Damien appeared in the mirror behind her. He'd changed into a dark suit that made him look dangerous and controlled, every inch the powerful man who'd built an empire through ruthless intelligence. But his eyes, when they met hers in the reflection, were full of fear. You don't have to do this, he said one more time. Yes, I do. Lila turned to face him. Tell me what happens after. After Castellano is arrested and the federal agents move in. What happens to us? We go somewhere safe, somewhere far from Blackport and everything associated with this life. Damien's hand settled on her shoulders. I'm done with this world, Lila. Done with the power plays and the violence and the constant danger. I'm going to sell every business, liquidate every asset that's connected to criminal activity, and we're going to start over. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere our child can grow up without ever knowing what their father used to be. What about who you are? You built all of this. It's part of you. You're part of me, Damien said fiercely. You and our baby. Everything else is just noise. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. After tonight, I'm choosing you, permanently, completely. No more sacrifices. No more distance. Just us. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a promise made on the edge of a cliff. At 10 p.m., a car took Lila to the Opal Room. Damien wanted to come, but Marcus had vetoed it immediately. Castellano couldn't know they were working together, couldn't see any sign that the divorce had been staged. So Lila made the drive alone, watching the city lights blur past the window and trying to control her breathing. The club looked exactly as she remembered, dark and expensive and humming with secrets. But tonight, knowing that federal agents were scattered throughout the crowd, Lila looked at the other patrons differently. Were they criminals like Castellano, or undercover law enforcement waiting for the signal to move? The same pretty bartender from months ago spotted her immediately. His eyes widened in recognition, and he reached for a phone. Lila waited, heart pounding, while he made a quick call. Then he gestured toward the back of the club. "Mr. Castellano is expecting you," he said. Of course he was. Lila walked through the crowd on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The private booth in the back corner was occupied, and as she got closer, she saw Victor Castellano sitting in exactly the same spot as their first meeting. Elena was beside him, and both siblings watched Lila approach with expressions that sent ice down her spine. "Ms. Hart," Victor said, standing, "what an unexpected pleasure. Please, sit." Lila slid into the booth across from them. Up close, she could see the calculation in Victor's eyes, the way he was cataloging every detail of her appearance. His gaze dropped to her stomach, visible now under the fitted dress Marcus had insisted she wear, and something shifted in his expression. "You've been busy," he said mildly. 5 months in hiding. Very impressive. I have to admit, I underestimated Marcus Vance's ability to make people disappear. "I wasn't hiding from you," Lila lied. "I was hiding from Damien, from this entire world. I wanted nothing to do with any of it. And yet here you are," Elena leaned forward, "back in Blackport, in our club, wearing surveillance equipment that's currently broadcasting this conversation to federal agents." Lila's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please." Victor's smile was razor sharp. "Did you really think we wouldn't check? The moment you walked through that door, our security scanned you for weapons, tracking devices, and recording equipment. The wire you're wearing is transmitting on a federal frequency. The camera in your necklace is standard FBI issue. You're not here for a conversation, Ms. Hart. You're here as bait." Panic clawed up Lila's throat. "That's not... I didn't... Save it." Victor gestured, and 2 large men appeared from the shadows behind the booth. "Take her to the back office. Make sure she stays comfortable while we have a conversation with the federal agents who thought they could raid my establishment." The men reached for Lila, and she tried to stand, tried to run, but they were faster. Strong hands gripped her arms, and suddenly she was being hauled out of the booth and toward a door marked private. "Let me go!" Lila struggled and felt the wire shift under her clothing. "You can't... This is assault. This is kidnapping." "This is a private business owner removing a trespasser," Elena said calmly, following them. "The federal agents can try to make it something else, but by the time they get a warrant to search the private areas of this club, you'll be long gone." They shoved Lila into an office, small, windowless, with concrete walls that looked soundproof. One of the men pushed her into a chair while the other locked the door. Elena stood over her, arms crossed. "Here's what's going to happen," Elena said. "We're going to wait until the federal agents realize their bait has been compromised. Then we're going to negotiate. They leave my brother alone, drop whatever charges they think they can make stick, and we return you unharmed. Everyone goes home happy." "They won't negotiate with you," Lila said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "You're going to federal prison no matter what." "Maybe, but you'll be dead long before that happens." Elena pulled out a gun, small, efficient, terrifying, and set it on the desk. "I don't particularly want to kill a pregnant woman. It's messy and morally complicated. But I will if the alternative is spending the rest of my life in a cell. So I suggest you pray that your federal friends are more interested in your safety than in arresting my brother." The door burst open. Marcus Vance came through it like a force of nature, moving so fast Lila barely tracked the motion. He had the first guard down in seconds, then turned on the second with brutal efficiency. Elena reached for the gun, but Marcus was faster. He kicked it off the desk and had Elena pinned against the wall before she could blink. "Federal agents are sweeping the building right now," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "Castellano is in custody. Your security team is in custody. Every single person in this club who's part of your operation is going to federal prison. It's over, Elena." "Where's Lila?" Damien's voice came from the doorway, and then he was there, scanning the room until his eyes found her. The relief on his face was so intense it almost hurt to look at. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine," Lila managed. "They knew about the wire. They knew everything." "Because we let them know," Marcus said. He pulled out handcuffs and secured Elena efficiently. "The wire you found was the decoy, Miss Castellano. The real surveillance equipment has been broadcasting from Lila's shoes this entire time. We have every word you said on record, including multiple threats and an attempted kidnapping." Elena's face went white. "That's entrapment." "That's evidence." Marcus hauled her to her feet. "And it's more than enough to put you away for 20 years. More federal agents poured into the room, taking custody of Elena and the guards. One of them, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and the unmistakable bearing of someone in charge, approached Lila. "Ms. Hart, I'm Agent Sarah Chen. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm okay," Lila said, though she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "The baby?" "We have paramedics standing by. They'll check you out and make sure everything's fine." Agent Chen's expression softened. "You were very brave tonight. The testimony and evidence you helped us gather is going to take down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the East Coast." Damien helped Lila to her feet, keeping one arm wrapped protectively around her waist. "What happens now?" "Now we process arrests, secure evidence, and begin building the prosecution's case." Agent Chen gestured toward the door. "You're free to go. We'll need Ms. Hart to give a formal statement tomorrow, but tonight, get her somewhere safe and let her rest." They left the Opal room through a side exit, avoiding the chaos of federal agents and arrested criminals filling the main club. Outside, the night air felt impossibly clean after the stale atmosphere of the office. Lila took a deep breath and felt the adrenaline finally start to drain from her system. "It's really over?" she asked. "It's really over," Marcus confirmed. "Castellano is going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison. His organization is dismantled. And you," he looked at Damien, "you're finally free." Damien pulled Lila closer. "We're free." The drive back to the hotel passed in a blur of exhaustion and relief. By the time they reached the penthouse suite, Lila could barely keep her eyes open. The paramedics were waiting, and they checked her vital signs and did a quick ultrasound that confirmed the baby was fine. Heartbeat strong, no signs of distress. "You should rest," the lead paramedic said. "The stress you've been under isn't good for the pregnancy. Take it easy for the next few days." After everyone left, Lila found herself alone with Damien for the first time in 5 months. They stood in the middle of the suite, looking at each other, and suddenly everything that had been held back by fear and distance came flooding through. Damien moved first, crossing to her and dropping to his knees. He pressed his face against her stomach, arms wrapping around her waist, and Lila felt wetness seeping through her dress. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything. For the divorce, for the lies, for making you face danger alone. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was hurt you." Lila ran her fingers through his hair. "You did protect me. Maybe not the way either of us wanted, but you kept me alive. You kept our baby safe. That's what matters." "I missed so much," Damien's voice cracked. 5 months of your pregnancy, feeling the baby move, all of it. I'll never get that time back." "No," Lila agreed. "But you're here now, and we have the rest of our lives to make new memories." Damien stood up and kissed her, soft at first, then deeper, with 5 months of longing poured into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me again," he said, "not because of danger or protection or strategy, just because I love you and I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving it." "We're already married," Lila pointed out, smiling despite the tears streaming down her face. The divorce went through. Legally, we're strangers. Damien pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a ring that caught the light like captured stars. So marry me again, this time with no secrets, no lies, just us choosing each other because we can't imagine a future any other way. Lila looked at the ring, then at Damien's face, exhausted and hopeful and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you again. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her again, and Lila felt the last pieces of fear finally start to dissolve. Later, lying in bed with Damien's hand resting on her stomach and the baby moving beneath his palm, Lila allowed herself to believe that maybe, finally, they were safe. That maybe the worst was behind them, and the future could actually be the quiet, normal life they'd both dreamed of. But somewhere across the city, in a federal holding cell, Victor Castellano sat in the darkness and made his own plans. Plans that didn't involve prison. Plans that involved revenge. And in Blackport, where power and violence had always been two sides of the same coin, the game was never truly over until someone was dead. The warning came at 3 a.m, 6 days after Castellano's arrest. Lila woke to the sound of Damien's phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. She felt him tense beside her, then heard his sharp intake of breath as he read whatever message had just arrived. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled in a way that made her stomach drop. We need to move, right now. Lila sat up, still fuzzy with sleep. What's happening? Marcus just got word from his contact in the federal system. Castellano made bail 2 hours ago. The words didn't make sense at first. Lila's brain couldn't reconcile them with what Agent Chen had told them. That Castellano would be held without bail, that the charges were too serious, that he'd never see freedom again. That's impossible, she said. They told us he couldn't get bail. The charges... His lawyers found a judge willing to set bail at $50 million. Castellano posted it immediately. Damien was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with military efficiency. He's out, Lila, and the first thing he's going to do is come after us. Lila's hand went automatically to her stomach, where the baby was sleeping peacefully, unaware that the danger they'd thought was over had just come roaring back. She was 6 months pregnant now, visibly and undeniably carrying Damien's child, and the vulnerability of that reality hit her like a physical blow. Where do we go? She asked, forcing herself to stay calm. Marcus has a boat waiting at the harbor. We're leaving Blackport, leaving the country if we have to. Damien tossed her a bag that had apparently been packed and ready for exactly this scenario. Get dressed. We have maybe 10 minutes before... The window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the bedroom in a spray of glittering shards, and Lila screamed as Damien threw himself over her, shielding her body with his own. Through the broken window came a canister that bounced once on the floor before releasing thick gray smoke. Lila's eyes started burning immediately, her throat closing as she tried to breathe. Gas! Damien choked out. He grabbed a shirt and pressed it over Lila's mouth and nose, then hauled her toward the bedroom door. But it burst open before they reached it, and 2 masked figures in tactical gear stormed through. Damien fought them with desperate ferocity, landing punches that would have dropped normal men. But these weren't normal men. They moved with professional precision, and within seconds they had Damien pinned against the wall while a third figure entered the room. Victor Castellano pulled off his mask and smiled. Good evening, he said pleasantly, as if they were meeting for drinks instead of a home invasion. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Let her go, Damien snarled, still struggling against the men holding him. This is between you and me. Lila has nothing to do with it. On the contrary, Lila has everything to do with it. Castellano approached her, and Lila tried to back away, but her legs hit the bed, and she had nowhere else to go. You cost me my organization, Ms. Hart, my freedom. My sister is facing 30 years in federal prison because of the testimony you provided. That kind of damage requires compensation. What do you want? Lila's voice came out steadier than she felt. Justice. Symmetry. You took something precious from me, so I'm going to take something precious from you. Castellano's gaze dropped to her stomach. An eye for an eye, as they say. Pure terror flooded through Lila. No, please, the baby didn't do anything to you. This isn't... Relax, Castellano interrupted. I'm not a monster. I'm not going to hurt a child. He pulled out a gun and pointed it at Damien instead. But I'm going to make Damien Crowe watch everything he loves burn before I kill him, starting with the illusion that he can protect you. Victor, don't do this, Damien said, and Lila heard genuine fear in his voice for the first time. You want revenge? Take it out on me. Torture me. Kill me. Whatever you need. But leave her alone, please. Begging doesn't suit you. Castellano cocked the gun. Here's what's going to happen. My men are going to take Lila somewhere secure. Somewhere you'll never find her. And you're going to spend the rest of your very short life knowing that your wife and child are out there, terrified and alone, because you weren't strong enough to save them. I'll hunt you down, Damien said quietly. I'll find you wherever you hide, and I'll make you regret ever touching her. I'm counting on it. Castellano gestures to his men. Take her, and if Damien tries to follow, shoot him in the knees. I want him alive for now, but mobility is optional. The men moved toward Lila, and she felt panic clawing up her throat. This couldn't be happening. They'd won. Castellano was supposed to be in prison, and she and Damien were supposed to be safe, and their baby was supposed to grow up in a world without this kind of violence. But the world didn't care what was supposed to happen. One of the men grabbed Lila's arm, and she tried to fight, tried to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth, and suddenly she was being dragged toward the shattered window. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw Damien struggling with inhuman strength, saw blood on his face where someone had hit him, saw the desperation in his eyes. Then the world tilted. The man holding Lila suddenly released her and stumbled backward, a dark stain spreading across his tactical vest. The sound of the gunshot came a half-second later, sharp and impossibly loud in the enclosed space. More shots followed, and the second masked man went down. Lila hit the floor and covered her head, trying to make herself as small as possible while gunfire erupted around her. When the shooting stopped, she looked up to see Marcus Vance standing in the doorway with a rifle, flanked by 4 men in matching tactical gear. The room was a war zone, smoke still hanging in the air, glass crunching underfoot, bodies bleeding on the expensive carpet. Castellano was gone. Damien! Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides, checking Damien for injuries. Are you hit? I'm fine. Lila, where's Lila? I'm here, Lila managed, though her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. I'm okay. Damien was beside her in an instant, hands running over her body, checking for wounds, for blood, for any sign that she'd been hurt. The baby? Is the baby? Moving, Lila said, pressing his hand to her stomach where she could feel frantic kicks. Scared, I think, but alive. We need to evacuate, Marcus said grimly. Castellano won't have come alone. There could be more of his people in the building. He was right. As they made their way out of the penthouse, they encountered 2 more of Castellano's men in the hallway. Marcus's team handled them with brutal efficiency, but Lila could hear more footsteps echoing up the stairwell, more voices coordinating in the kind of tactical shorthand that meant professional mercenaries. This isn't just revenge, Damien said as they descended the emergency stairs. This is a military operation. Castellano must have called in every favor he had, hired every gun he could afford. He liquidated assets, one of Marcus's men confirmed. We intercepted communications about wire transfers totaling $15 million to various offshore accounts. He's funding a private war. They burst out of the stairwell into the hotel's underground parking garage, where 3 armored vehicles waited with engines running. Marcus practically threw Lila into the middle vehicle, Damien climbing in beside her while armed guards filled the other seats. The convoy pulled out with a screech of tires, and Lila caught a glimpse of more masked figures running toward them before the vehicles accelerated up the exit ramp and onto the street. Behind them, the sound of gunfire echoed through the parking structure. Where are we going? Lila asked. The harbor, Marcus said from the driver's seat. We have a boat standing by. Once we're on the water, Castellano will have a much harder time reaching us. And then what? We run forever? We run until we can figure out how to end this permanently. Marcus took a corner hard enough to throw everyone against their seatbelts. The federal government has issued a warrant for Castellano's arrest for tonight's attack. His bail has been revoked, but he's got resources and connections we're still mapping. Until we know the full extent of his operation, the safest place for you is somewhere he can't reach. The drive to the harbor took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Lila kept expecting more vehicles to appear, more gunfire, more violence. But they made it to the docks without further incident, pulling up beside a sleek yacht that looked more like a small ship. "This is yours?" Lila asked as Marcus hustled them up the gangway. "It's borrowed from someone who owes Damien a favor." Marcus waited until they were on deck, then signaled the crew to cast off. "It's got enough fuel to reach international waters, and from there we can go anywhere. Europe, South America, Asia, your choice." The yacht's engines rumbled to life, and Lila felt the deck shift beneath her feet as they pulled away from the dock. Blackport's skyline receded behind them, the city lights reflecting off dark water, and she had the surreal thought that this might be the last time she ever saw the place where her life had completely fallen apart and somehow found meaning again. Damien led her below deck to a cabin that was surprisingly luxurious, wood paneling and soft lighting, and a bed that looked impossibly inviting after the chaos of the night. He sat her down and knelt in front of her, hands on her knees, eyes searching her face. "Are you really okay?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Lila admitted. "I thought we were safe. I thought it was over." "I know, I did too." Damien's expression was raw with guilt. "I'm sorry. I should have planned for this. Should have known Castellano would find a way out." "You're not psychic. None of us could have predicted this." Lila took his face in her hands. "But we need to talk about what happens next. Because I can't do this anymore, Damien. I can't keep running and hiding and waiting for the next attack. Our baby is going to be born in 3 months. I need stability, safety, a future that isn't constantly under threat. I know, and I'm going to give you that." Damien's voice was steel wrapped in determination. "I'm going to end this. Not by running, not by hiding, but by making sure Victor Castellano can never hurt us again." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Get some rest. We'll be in international waters in a few hours, and then we can make a real plan." Lila wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers and strategies and guarantees, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight, and the baby was finally settling down after the chaos. She let Damien help her into bed, felt him lie down beside her, and closed her eyes. She woke to voices arguing above deck. Lila checked her phone. She'd been asleep for almost 3 hours. The yacht was moving steadily, the engine's vibration a constant presence beneath her. She could hear Damien and Marcus talking, their voices raised in the kind of argument that meant fundamental disagreement. Quietly, she climbed out of bed and made her way up to the deck. Dawn was breaking over the ocean, painting the water in shades of pink and gold. Damien and Marcus stood near the helm, and both turned when they heard her footsteps. "I thought you were sleeping," Damien said. "I was. Until you two started fighting loud enough to wake the dead." Lila crossed her arms. "What's going on?" Marcus and Damien exchanged a look. Then Damien sighed. "Marcus wants to keep running. Head to South America, set you up somewhere remote. Wait for Castellano to make a mistake we can exploit." "And you don't agree?" "No, because Castellano isn't going to make a mistake. He's too smart, too careful. He'll keep coming after us, and eventually he'll find us. Maybe in 6 months, maybe in 6 years, but eventually." Damien's jaw tightened. "I want to go back to Blackport." "That's insane," Lila said. "It's the only way. Castellano expects us to run, so that's where he'll focus his resources. If we go back, if we face him on ground we know with resources we control, we have a chance." "A chance to get killed," Marcus interjected. "Damien, I understand the impulse, but Lila is 6 months pregnant. She needs protection, not a war zone." "I need this to end," Lila said quietly. Both men looked at her. "Marcus, I appreciate everything you've done to keep us safe. But Damien's right. We can't run forever. And I don't want our child born on a yacht in the middle of the ocean, or in some remote compound where we're prisoners of our own fear. If we go back, Castellano will move against you immediately," Marcus warned. "Then we move first." Damien pulled out his phone and brought up a map. "I've been thinking about this for the last 3 hours. Castellano's strength is in the shadows. Intimidation, leverage, violence that happens behind closed doors. But what if we drag him into the light? What if we make it impossible for him to hurt us without destroying himself in the process?" "I'm listening," Marcus said carefully. "We go public. Not just with the federal charges, but with everything, the threats, the attacks, the attempted kidnapping. We hold a press conference and tell the entire city exactly what Victor Castellano has done and why. We make Lila the most visible person in Blackport. Interviews, social media, constant public appearances. Castellano can't touch her without the whole world watching. That puts a target on her back, Marcus said. The target's already there. This way, at least we control the narrative. Damien looked at Lila. But it means no more privacy, no more quiet life. Every moment would be documented, shared, turned into ammunition against Castellano. Lila thought about it. Thought about spending the next 3 months of her pregnancy in front of cameras, telling strangers about the most traumatic experiences of her life. Thought about raising a child in the public eye, with every milestone and moment captured and broadcast. Then she thought about the alternative. Years of running, of hiding, of never knowing when Castellano might finally catch up to them. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's burn his empire to the ground using nothing but the truth." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay. If we're doing this, we do it right. I'll start making calls. We'll need media contacts, legal advisors, security that can handle the publicity. And we'll need to move fast before Castellano realizes what we're planning." They turned the yacht around. The trip back to Blackport took 6 hours, and Lila spent most of it on the phone with James Torres, the federal prosecutor who had built the case against Castellano. Torres was initially skeptical of the plan, but as Damien laid out the strategy, she heard the prosecutor's tone shift from doubt to calculation. "It could work," Torres admitted. "If you can keep Lila safe long enough to get the story out, the public pressure alone might force Castellano into making mistakes. And every threat he makes, every move he attempts, becomes more evidence for the prosecution." "How do we keep her safe?" Lila asked on speaker so everyone could hear. "We turn her into a fortress. Round-the-clock security, public appearances only in controlled environments, every movement documented and broadcast. Castellano would have to be suicidal to try anything." "He might be," Damien said quietly. "He's already facing life in prison. He might decide that revenge is worth dying for." "Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance." Torres paused. "I can have federal agents assigned to Lila's protection detail. Official, on-the-record protection that Castellano would have to go through the government to reach. Combined with your private security, it should be enough." The plan solidified over the next few hours. Torres would arrange a press conference for the following day, giving them time to prepare Lila's statement and coordinate security. Marcus would handle the logistics, venue, transportation, media access. And Damien would use every contact and connection he had to ensure the story reached as wide an audience as possible. They docked in Blackport as the sun was setting, painting the harbor in shades of amber and red. Lila stepped off the yacht expecting to feel fear, but instead she felt something closer to determination. This was her city, her home. And she was done letting Victor Castellano make her afraid of it. The safe house Marcus had arranged was different from the others, a downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows and visibility from the street. The point wasn't to hide anymore. The point was to be seen. That night, Lila sat at a desk and wrote out everything that had happened, every threat, every moment of fear, every time Castellano had tried to use her as a weapon against Damien. The words poured out of her in a torrent, and by the time she finished, she had 15 pages of single-spaced testimony that read like a thriller novel, except every word was true. Damien read it over her shoulder, his hand resting on hers. "This is going to change everything," he said quietly. "I know. People will judge you, question you. Some will call you a liar, say you're seeking attention or money or revenge. I know that too." Lila looked up at him. "But some people will believe me. And those people will put pressure on the system to actually hold Castellano accountable. That's worth the judgment." The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. the following day, in the ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, where this whole nightmare had started 6 months ago. Torres had contacted every major news outlet in the region, and by morning, the media attention was overwhelming. Camera crews lined up outside the hotel. Reporters shouted questions at Lila as Marcus's security team escorted her inside. Social media was already buzzing with speculation. In a private room before the conference, a makeup artist tried to cover the shadows under Lila's eyes while Torres went over the statement one more time. "Stick to the facts," he advised. Don't embellish, don't speculate, just tell your story exactly as it happened. The truth is damning enough. What if Castellano shows up? Lila asked. Then we arrest him on the spot. He's violating bail conditions just by being in the same building as you. Torres smiled grimly. Honestly, I'm half hoping he tries something. It would make the case that much easier. At 2 p.m. exactly, Lila walked into the ballroom and faced a wall of cameras. The room was packed. Reporters, cameras, federal agents in dark suits, and what looked like half of Blackport's legal community. Damien stood off to one side with Marcus, both watching her with expressions of fierce pride. Torres sat at the table beside her, lending official weight to her testimony. Lila adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and began to speak. My name is Lila Hart. 6 months ago, I was married to Damien Crow. 3 weeks into our marriage, that relationship was used as a weapon by a man named Victor Castellano to extort and threaten my husband. Today, I'm here to tell you exactly what Castellano did and why he needs to face justice for it. She read her statement slowly, clearly, making eye contact with the cameras and the reporters. She described the surveillance, the threats, the divorce that had been orchestrated to protect her. She talked about discovering her pregnancy and about Castellano's plan to use her unborn child as leverage. And she described in precise detail the attack on the penthouse, the attempted kidnapping, the violence that had almost cost her and her baby their lives. When she finished, the room was silent. Then the questions started. Dozens of reporters shouting over each other, cameras flashing, the noise almost overwhelming. Torres fielded most of them, but some were directed at Lila specifically. Ms. Hart, why are you coming forward now? Because I'm tired of being afraid. Because my baby deserves to grow up in a world where men like Victor Castellano can't terrorize people without consequences. Are you seeking financial compensation? No, I'm seeking justice. Mr. Castellano's lawyers claim you're lying, that this is a fabrication designed to cover up your husband's criminal activities. How do you respond? Lila looked directly into the camera. I have documentation, surveillance footage, federal testimony. Medical records showing the stress this situation has put on my pregnancy. Victor Castellano can call me a liar all he wants, but the evidence speaks for itself. The press conference lasted 90 minutes. By the time it ended, Lila's story was trending on social media, picked up by national news outlets, and generating exactly the kind of public outrage Torres had predicted. The pressure on the federal court system to deny Castellano's bail became immediate and intense. But the reaction from Castellano himself was even faster. Lila was in the car with Damien and Marcus, heading back to the safe house, when Marcus's phone rang. He listened for a moment, his expression darkening, then put the call on speaker. Say that again, he said. Agent Chen's voice filled the car. Castellano just posted a video response on social media. You need to see this. Marcus pulled it up on his tablet. The video showed Victor Castellano sitting in what looked like an expensive office, dressed in a suit, looking calm and reasonable and completely unthreatening. I've been watching Ms. Hart's press conference with great interest, he said to the camera, and I have to admit she's an excellent storyteller. The problem is, that's all it is. A story. I have never threatened Ms. Hart. I have never attempted to kidnap her. And the so-called attack on the penthouse was actually a home invasion by unknown assailants that I had nothing to do with. He leaned forward, his expression sympathetic. I understand Ms. Hart is under tremendous stress. Pregnancy is difficult, especially when you're estranged from your partner. It's natural to want someone to blame for that pain, but making false accusations against innocent people isn't the answer. I hope she gets the help she needs. The video ended. Lila stared at the screen, feeling fury rise in her chest. He's calling me crazy, making it seem like I invented everything because I'm an unstable pregnant woman. He's playing to his base, Torres said through the phone. People who want to believe that wealthy men don't do these things. People who are predisposed to doubt women's testimony. Will it work? Damien asked. For some people, yes, but not for everyone. And more importantly, not for the federal prosecutors who have actual evidence. Torres paused. Castellano just made a mistake. By denying everything publicly, he's locked himself into a narrative. When we prove he's lying, and we will prove it, the backlash will be devastating. The car pulled up to the safe house, and Marcus hustled them inside. But as Lila crossed the threshold, she had the distinct feeling that they'd just crossed a different kind of line. The war between them and Castellano was no longer happening in shadows. It was public now, playing out on cameras and social media and in the court of public opinion. And Lila had no idea who would win. The public battle lasted 3 weeks, and it was brutal. Castellano's legal team launched a coordinated media campaign painting Lila as an unstable woman seeking attention and money. They produced witnesses who claimed she had been seen arguing with Damien in public during their marriage, suggested her pregnancy was making her emotionally fragile, even hired a psychologist who had never met Lila to speculate on television about postpartum conditions that could cause delusions. But Torres and his team fought back harder. They released surveillance footage from the Opal Room showing Castellano's men grabbing Lila. They produced financial records proving Castellano had wired $15 million to known mercenaries. They had federal agents testify about the attack on the penthouse, complete with ballistics evidence and tactical analysis. Every lie Castellano told, they systematically dismantled with documentation and proof. And through it all, Lila remained visible. She did interviews from the safe house, always with her growing belly prominently displayed, speaking calmly and clearly about what had happened to her. She answered every question, no matter how hostile or invasive, with the kind of quiet strength that made even skeptics pause. And when Castellano's lawyers tried to paint her as a gold digger, she released her financial records showing she had never taken a single dollar from Damien beyond what she'd earned managing the bookstore. Public opinion began to shift. Social media campaigns sprang up supporting Lila, women sharing their own stories of being disbelieved, of having their credibility questioned because they dared to accuse powerful men. The hashtag Believe Lila trended for days. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse demanding Castellano's bail be revoked. The pressure became impossible to ignore. 2 weeks after Lila's press conference, a federal judge ruled that Castellano's bail was revoked due to new evidence of witness intimidation and continued criminal activity. Castellano was remanded to federal custody to await trial. Lila watched the news coverage from the safe house with Damien's arms around her, and for the first time in months, she let herself believe it might actually be over. But Victor Castellano had one final move to make. The message arrived on a Thursday afternoon, delivered to the safe house by a courier who disappeared before Marcus's security team could question him. It was a single envelope, expensive paper, addressed to Lila in elegant handwriting. Marcus wanted to have it tested for toxins before opening it, but Lila shook her head. If he wanted me dead, he wouldn't use poison. He'd want something more dramatic. She opened the envelope and pulled out a handwritten letter. Dear Lila, congratulations on your victory. You've successfully turned me into a villain in the public eye, destroyed my organization, and ensured I'll spend the rest of my life in a federal prison. Well done. But here's what you need to understand. You didn't win because you were smarter or stronger or more righteous. You won because I allowed you to win. Because the game was never about destroying you or Damien. It was about proving a point. Power isn't real unless someone is willing to fear it. Love isn't real unless someone is willing to sacrifice for it. You and Damien have both now. You've proven you'll do anything to protect each other and that child you're carrying. That's admirable. It's also weakness. Because now I know exactly how to hurt you, should I ever choose to. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Maybe when your child is 5 years old and starting school. Maybe when they're 16 and learning to drive. Maybe when they're 30 and have children of their own. The fear will always be there, Lila. Every time you hear a noise in the night, every time someone looks at your child too long, every time something feels wrong, you'll wonder if it's me. If I've decided it's time to collect on the debt you owe me for destroying my life. That's the real sentence I'm giving you. Not death, not violence. Just the knowledge that you'll never truly be safe. That you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when I'll come for what you took from me. Sleep well. Victor Lila's hands were shaking by the time she finished reading. Damien took the letter from her, read it, and his face went white with rage. He's trying to terrorize you, he said. Even from prison, he's trying to maintain control. And it's working, Lila whispered, because he's right. How do we ever feel safe knowing he's out there, planning and waiting? Marcus had been reading over Damien's shoulder. Now he pulled out his phone. I'm calling Torres. This letter is a direct threat. It's evidence of witness intimidation. Castellano just violated federal law from inside a prison cell. It won't matter, Lila said dully. He's already going to prison for life. What are they going to do? Give him extra life sentences? The threat is still there. The fear is still real. Damien knelt in front of her, taking her face in his hands. Listen to me. Castellano is trying to win psychologically because he's lost every other way. But he's locked in a cell. He has no resources, no organization, no power beyond the words on that page. And those words only have power if we give it to them. How do we not give it to them? Lila asked. How do I not spend the rest of my life afraid for our child? By choosing not to, Damien said simply. By deciding that we're going to live our lives fully and completely without letting the ghost of Victor Castellano dictate our choices. By trusting that the security we've built, the legal protections we've established, and the public scrutiny on his case will keep us safe. And if he does come after us someday, then we'll handle it, together, the way we've handled everything else. Damien pressed his forehead against hers. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we can't let fear win, not after everything we've survived. Torres arrived an hour later with 2 federal agents. He read Castellano's letter with a grim expression, then looked at Lila. This is prosecutable, he said. Clear witness intimidation, written threat, evidence of ongoing criminal intent. I can have additional charges filed by tomorrow. Will it make a difference? Lila asked. Torres hesitated. Honestly, probably not in terms of his sentence. He's already facing multiple life sentences without parole. But it will create a record. Documentation that he's continuing to threaten you even from custody. If anything ever happens to you or your family, this letter becomes evidence of premeditation. That's not exactly comforting, Lila said. I know, but it's something. Torres sat down across from her. Bob. Hart, I've been a federal prosecutor for 15 years. I've put away dozens of men like Castellano. Men who think they're untouchable, who believe power gives them the right to hurt people. And I've learned that the best revenge against men like that isn't fear. It's living well. Building a life so full and happy and successful that their threats become irrelevant. How do I do that when I'm terrified every moment? Lila's voice cracked. You start small. You take one day at a time. You focus on the baby coming, on rebuilding your marriage, on creating the future you want instead of the one Castellano is trying to force on you. Torres smiled slightly. And you remember that he's locked in an 8x10 cell while you're free to live your life. That's the victory, Ms. Hart. Your freedom versus his cage. That night, lying in bed with Damien's hand on her stomach and the baby kicking beneath his palm, Lila made a decision. She was done letting Victor Castellano control her life. Done giving his threats power. Done living in fear of a future that might never come. I want to get married again, she said into the darkness. Damien shifted beside her. We're already engaged. I know, but I want to do it now, before the baby comes. I want to stand up in front of everyone we love and choose you publicly, completely, without any shadow of fear or strategy hanging over it. I want our child to be born into a family that's whole and committed and refuses to let darkness win. She felt Damien's smile against her hair. When? Next week. Something small and private. Just us and the people who matter. No press, no publicity, no using our love as a weapon against anyone. Just a wedding. I think that's the best idea you've ever had. They planned it in 6 days, a feat that would have been impossible without Marcus's organizational skills and the small army of people who owed Damien favors. The ceremony would take place at sunset on the roof of Marcus's building, with only 20 guests and a view of the harbor where this whole nightmare had started. Lila found a dress that accommodated her 7-month belly, simple white silk that made her feel beautiful instead of enormous. Damien wore a dark suit that made him look like the dangerous, powerful man he was, tempered by the soft way he looked at her. Marcus stood as best man, and a federal agent named Sarah Chen, who had protected Lila during the worst of the threats, stood as her maid of honor. The ceremony was nothing like their first wedding. No elaborate venue, no hundreds of guests. No pretense of a perfect fairy tale. Instead, it was raw and honest and intimate. When Damien said his vows, his voice broke on the words about choosing her every day, about building a life worth protecting. When Lila promised to love him through darkness and light, through fear and joy, she meant every syllable with her whole heart. They kissed as the sun set over Blackport, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Lila felt something shift inside her. The fear didn't disappear completely. She suspected it never would, but it lost some of its power. Because standing beside Damien, surrounded by people who had fought for them and protected them and believed in them, Lila realized that Castellano had been wrong about one thing. Love wasn't weakness, it was the strongest weapon they had. The reception was small and perfect. They ate good food and drank sparkling cider and danced to music that made Lila's heart full. Marcus gave a toast that started with humor and ended with genuine emotion, talking about how Damien had transformed from a man who trusted no one to someone who had built a family worth dying for. Sarah Chen spoke about Lila's courage, her refusal to be intimidated, her strength in the face of impossible odds. And when it was over, when the guests had left and the caterers had cleaned up, Damien and Lila stood alone on the roof watching the city lights flicker like earthbound stars. "Are you happy?" Damien asked quietly. Lila pressed close to his side, one hand on her belly where the baby was doing what felt like gymnastics. "I'm terrified and exhausted and still processing trauma that's going to take years to fully heal from," she said honestly. "But yes, I'm happy because I'm here with you and we're building something real, and that matters more than the fear." "I love you," Damien said. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." I could never regret it, even with everything that's happened. The divorce, the threats, the fear. I'd do it all again if it meant ending up here with you. 2 months later, on a cold morning in early December, Lila went into labor. The contractions started at dawn, and by noon she was in the hospital with Damien gripping her hand and Marcus coordinating security outside her room like they were protecting a head of state. Federal agents stood guard in the hallways. The hospital had been vetted and secured. Every doctor and nurse had been background checked. But when their daughter finally arrived after 14 hours of labor, screaming and perfect and impossibly small, all the security in the world couldn't compare to the feeling of holding her for the first time. "She's beautiful," Damien whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny human they had created. "She's perfect." "What should we name her?" Lila asked, exhausted but euphoric. They had debated names for months without deciding. But looking at their daughter's face, determined and fierce, even at only minutes old, Damien smiled. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." And it was perfect. The first few weeks of Hope's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came with caring for a newborn. Lila had expected to feel constantly afraid, checking every shadow, jumping at every noise, convinced that Castellano would somehow reach them despite being locked away. But instead she found herself too busy and too tired and too completely in love with her daughter to spare much energy for fear. Torres called 3 weeks after Hope's birth with news. "Castellano's trial date has been set," he said, 4 months from now. "We're expecting it to last about 6 weeks, and the evidence is overwhelming. His lawyers are already trying to negotiate a plea deal." "Will you take it?" Lila asked, cradling Hope against her shoulder while the baby slept. "Only if it involves consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Nothing less." Torres paused. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected. Being a mother is terrifying in all new ways, but at least these are normal fears, diaper blowouts and sleep deprivation instead of hitmen and kidnapping." Torres laughed. "That's progress. Has Castellano attempted any contact?" "No, and honestly, I think he's realized that threatening us only strengthens the case against him. His lawyers probably told him to stay silent." "Good. Keep it that way. Focus on your family. Let the legal system handle Castellano." Lila did exactly that. She threw herself into motherhood with the same intensity she'd once put into surviving. She learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. She mastered the art of breastfeeding while eating takeout with her free hand. She discovered that the sound of Hope's laughter could make the worst day instantly better. Damien proved to be a better father than even Lila had hoped. He changed diapers at 3 a.m. without complaint. He walked Hope around the apartment for hours when she wouldn't sleep. He sang off-key lullabies and made silly faces and looked at their daughter like she was the most miraculous thing he had ever seen. And slowly, carefully, they built a life. Damien made good on his promise to walk away from the darker parts of his empire. He sold off the businesses with questionable connections, liquidated assets tied to criminal networks, and redirected his resources toward legitimate ventures. It took months and cost him a significant portion of his wealth, But he did it without hesitation. "Money isn't worth anything if we can't enjoy it safely," he said, when Lila questioned whether he was giving up too much. "Hope deserves parents who don't have to look over their shoulders. This is how we give her that." 6 months after Hope's birth, Torres called again. "The trial ended yesterday," he said. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Victor Castellano was found guilty on all counts: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, witness intimidation, and about 30 other felonies. The judge will formally sentence him next week, but we're looking at multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Lila felt something release in her chest, tension she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. It's really over? It's really over. Castellano will spend the rest of his life in a maximum security federal prison. Elena got 25 years. Their entire organization has been dismantled. You're safe, Ms. Hart. You and your family are finally, truly safe. That night, Lila told Damien the news while they put Hope to bed. Their daughter had just started sleeping through the night, a miracle that felt almost as significant as Castellano's conviction. They stood over her crib watching her sleep, this tiny, perfect human who had no idea how much darkness had surrounded her arrival. "What do we do now?" Lila asked quietly. "We live," Damien said simply. "We raise our daughter. We build the life we want instead of the one we had to survive. We choose happiness." It sounds almost too simple. Maybe it is simple. Maybe we just made it complicated by letting fear control us. Damien pulled her close. "I spent years believing that power and control were the only things that mattered, that showing weakness would destroy me. But you taught me that loving someone completely, trusting them with your whole heart, that's not weakness. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." "You taught me the same thing," Lila said. "I thought love meant finding someone safe and predictable. Instead, I found you, dangerous and complicated and completely wrong for me on paper. And it turned out to be exactly right." They stood there for a long time, watching their daughter sleep and listening to the quiet sounds of the city outside. Somewhere in a federal prison, Victor Castellano was beginning the first night of a life sentence. Somewhere in the world, other people were facing their own battles against darkness and fear. But here, in this moment, Lila and Damien were simply a family, safe, whole, together. A year after Hope's birth, Damien surprised Lila with a gift, a small bookstore in downtown Blackport, completely renovated and ready to open. It was the dream she'd mentioned once in passing during their first year of marriage, before everything fell apart. "I know you loved managing books," Damien said as he handed her the keys. "I thought maybe you'd enjoy owning them too. No pressure, no timeline. But it's here if you want it." Lila walked through the empty store, running her hands over the shelves, imagining them filled with stories and possibilities. "It's perfect," she said, "but I can't run it alone, not with Hope." "So don't run it alone. Hire people, build a team. Make it whatever you want it to be." Damien smiled. "I'll handle Hope during your work hours. I've gotten pretty good at the dad thing." 3 months later, Hart's Books opened to a crowd of customers who had followed Lila's story and wanted to support her new beginning. She stocked the shelves with her favorite genres, romance and mystery and thrillers that ended with hope instead of despair. She hired 2 employees who loved books as much as she did, and she created a space that felt safe and welcoming and completely removed from the darkness that had once threatened to consume her life. On the bookstore's first anniversary, a package arrived. It was delivered by regular mail, and at first Lila thought it might be a gift from a customer. But when she opened it, she found a single photograph inside, a picture of Hope playing in the park, taken from a distance, with a note written in familiar handwriting. "Beautiful child. Congratulations on everything you've built. See you in 20 years. Lila's hands started shaking. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Victor Castellano's elegant script. But how? He was in maximum security. He had no contact with the outside world beyond monitored phone calls and supervised visits. She called Torres immediately. The prosecutor arrived at the bookstore within an hour, along with federal agents who secured the photograph and note as evidence. Torres's expression was grim as he examined them. "This is a problem," he admitted. "Castellano shouldn't have access to the outside world like this. Someone helped him, either a corrupt guard or a visitor who smuggled the photo out. "What does it mean?" Lila asked, though she already knew. "Is he threatening Hope?" Technically, the note doesn't contain an explicit threat, but combined with the unauthorized photograph, it's clearly meant to intimidate you. Torres pulled out his phone. "I'm going to have federal investigators look into how this happened. Anyone who helped Castellanos send this is going to face serious charges." "That doesn't help me feel safe," Lila said. "If he can get someone to photograph my daughter and deliver it here, what else can he do from prison?" "Nothing," Damien said firmly. He'd arrived at the bookstore the moment Lila called, and now he stood beside her with that look of controlled fury she recognized from their worst moments. "He can send photographs and notes and try to make us afraid, but he can't actually touch us. The photo was taken in a public park with dozens of witnesses. Hope was never in danger." "This time," Lila said. "But what about next time? What about 20 years from now, when he's had decades to plan and scheme and build new networks?" Marcus, who had come with Damien, spoke up. "Then we adapt. We maintain security protocols. We stay vigilant, but we don't let this destroy the life you've built. That's exactly what Castellano wants, to steal your peace, even from behind bars." The federal investigation into the photograph took 3 weeks and resulted in the arrest of a prison guard who had been accepting bribes from Castellanos' remaining associates. The guard was fired and charged with federal crimes. Castellano was moved to an even more secure facility with stricter monitoring protocols. But the fear lingered. Lila found herself checking over her shoulder constantly, scanning crowds for threats, lying awake at night imagining worst-case scenarios. It was affecting her sleep, her work, her ability to enjoy the life she'd fought so hard to build. Finally, Damien sat her down and spoke with the kind of gentle honesty that had become the foundation of their marriage. "You need to talk to someone, Volk," he said. "A professional. Someone who can help you process the trauma and fear." "I'm fine," Lila protested. "You're not fine. You're surviving, which is different, and you've been surviving for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to truly live without fear." Damien took her hands. "I've already found someone, a therapist who specializes in trauma and PTSD. She's helped other people who've been through situations like ours. Will you at least meet with her?" Lila wanted to refuse, wanted to insist she could handle this on her own, but looking at Damien's concerned face, thinking about Hope growing up with a mother who flinched at shadows, she realized he was right. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll try." Therapy was harder than Lila expected and more helpful than she could have imagined. Over months of sessions, she worked through the trauma of the threats, the divorce, the fear that had defined so much of her life. She learned coping mechanisms for anxiety. She practiced being present instead of constantly scanning for danger. And slowly, painfully, she began to heal. The therapist helped her understand that what she was experiencing was normal, that anyone who had survived what she'd been through would struggle with fear and hypervigilance. But normal didn't mean permanent. With work and time and support, she could reclaim her sense of safety. Damien started therapy too, dealing with his own guilt and trauma from the choices he'd made. They did couples counseling together, learning how to communicate about fear without letting it control them, how to support each other through the hard moments, how to build a marriage based on trust instead of survival. Hope turned 2, then 3, then 4. She grew into a bright, curious child with her father's determination and her mother's kindness. She knew nothing about Victor Castellano or the darkness that had surrounded her birth. To her, the world was safe and full of wonder, and Lila worked hard to keep it that way. The bookstore thrived. Lila expanded to include a cafe and a space for community events, author readings, book clubs, story time for children. It became a gathering place for people who loved stories, and Lila found deep satisfaction in creating something beautiful out of the ashes of her trauma. Damien built something too. A foundation dedicated to helping victims of organized crime rebuild their lives. He used his resources and connections to provide legal support, security consulting, and financial assistance to people trying to escape dangerous situations. It was his way of transforming the power he'd once used for questionable purposes into something that actually helped people. 5 years after Castellano's conviction, Torres called with unexpected news. "Victor Castellano died this morning," he said without preamble. Heart attack in his cell. He was 53 years old. Lila sat down heavily, not sure what she was feeling. Relief? Vindication? Something more complicated that didn't have a name? Are you certain? She asked. Absolutely. I've seen the death certificate and the coroner's report. It was natural causes. Years of stress and poor health caught up with him. Torres paused. He's gone, Ms. Hart. The threat is over, permanently. After she hung up, Lila walked into the bookstore's back office where Damien was doing paperwork. She told him the news and watched his face cycle through the same complicated emotions she was experiencing. How do you feel? He asked. I don't know. I thought I'd feel triumphant or relieved or something. Instead, I just feel tired. Like I've been carrying a weight for so long that even though it's gone, I still feel its absence. Lila leaned against his desk. Is it wrong that I'm not celebrating? No, he was still a human being, even if he was a terrible one. It's okay to feel complicated about his death. Damien pulled her into his arms. But it means you're finally truly free. No more looking over your shoulder. No more wondering if he'll send another message. It's over. That night, Lila and Damien sat Hope down and told her a simplified version of their story. That there had once been a dangerous man who had threatened their family, but that he was gone now and could never hurt them. Hope listened with wide eyes, processing this information about parents she'd only ever known as loving and safe. Were you scared? She asked. Very scared, Lila admitted. But we got through it together, and we learned that being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Like when I went to the dentist even though I was scared? Hope asked. Damien smiled. Exactly like that. Sometimes being brave looks like fighting monsters, and sometimes it looks like sitting in a dentist's chair. Both count. In the years that followed, Lila found that Castellano's death had given her something she hadn't expected. Permission to stop surviving and start truly living. The hypervigilance gradually faded. The nightmares became less frequent. She could enjoy a day at the park with Hope without constantly scanning for threats. The bookstore continued to grow. Damien's foundation helped hundreds of families escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. Hope started school and made friends and showed no signs of the darkness that had surrounded her early life. And Lila and Damien's marriage deepened into something neither of them had imagined possible during those early desperate days. They learned to laugh together without the shadow of fear. They built traditions and memories and a life so full and rich that the pain of their past became just one chapter in a much longer story. On their 10th wedding anniversary, counting from their second ceremony, they returned to the rooftop where they'd gotten married. Marcus had arranged for them to have the space for the evening, and they stood at the same spot where they'd exchanged vows, looking out at the city they'd fought so hard to make their home. Do you ever regret it? Lila asked. Everything you gave up to be with me? The power, the empire, the life you had before? Damien pulled her close, and Lila felt his heartbeat steady against her cheek. Not for a single second. That life was hollow, empty. I had everything except what actually mattered. He tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. You taught me that real power isn't about controlling others. It's about choosing to be vulnerable with the right person. About building something together that's stronger than anything you could build alone. We've built a good life, Lila said. We've built an extraordinary life, and we're not done yet. Damien kissed her softly. I love you, Lila Hartcrow. I loved you when I thought I had to let you go. I loved you when we were fighting for survival. And I love you now, in this quiet moment where we get to simply be together without fear or pressure or anything except choice. I love you too, Lila whispered. I choose you, every day, in every timeline, for the rest of our lives. Below them, Blackport's lights spread out like a constellation of possibilities. Somewhere in the city, Hope was at a sleepover with her best friend, giggling about things only 8-year-olds found funny. The bookstore would open tomorrow to customers who had become like family. The foundation would help another family find safety and hope. And on this rooftop, 2 people who had survived darkness stood together in the light they'd built. Proof that love could be stronger than fear, that transformation was possible, and that the future belonged to those brave enough to fight for it. They had started with a divorce meant to save a life. They had survived threats and terror and a war that had tested every limit of their strength. And they had emerged not just intact, but transformed, two broken pieces that had somehow fused together into something unbreakable. That was their story. Not the darkness they'd survived, but the light they'd chosen. Not the fear that had threatened to destroy them, but the love that had saved them. And as the sun set over Blackport for the 10,000th time, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise, Damien and Lila held each other close and looked toward a future that was finally, beautifully, completely their own.